Welcome, I'm Michael Bickert. Thanks for joining me today as we explore concepts with the objective of improving your management skills and growing your business. Grab your notepads, grab your pens, because I want you to make a commitment to yourself that you will jot down some notes, jot down some sort of action item that you can implement in your business today. That's what this is all about, implementation to drive your business forward. Now, today, I want to talk to you about your customer-facing employees, those team members that are on the front lines and do the most interacting with your customers. And depending on the kind of business you have, some of you have people that are interacting face-to-face, other via chat or email, telephone, all sorts of different ways for different businesses, but I want to talk to you about those. And the reason why I want to talk to you about them is because they're super important, obviously, but the reason I rather was inspired to talk about this today was based on a recent experience I had in interacting with a business, and that made me, it gave me pause and made me reflect on a few businesses that I've had experiences with over time. And I thought, you know what? This is what I always talk about, is the ability to learn from other businesses. As a customer, we can learn what our customers might experience, or rather we can, another way to look at it is, as entrepreneurs, we can think what ways we might be able to improve our business by framing things through the lens of a customer, and what better way to put ourselves in the shoes of customers than just to record and memorize and think about those experiences we have when we are in fact customers. So the first one that I think about was a business that I dealt with. My whole family dealt with them for about over 10 years. I don't remember exactly, but over 10 years. And I haven't referred to this business before, so I know I gave an anecdote about another company that wouldn't give me a small little refund I was looking for, whatever. This is a completely different company. This company, on two separate occasions, I actually inquired as to how much money I'd spent there. I was curious, and I know that companies have databases, and the first time was maybe, I don't know, about 4 years ago, and they were able to share with me, I think it was north of $50,000 that we had spent with, as a family, with that company. And then a few years passed, and I had a very negative experience involving the general manager and part owner of the business. And this experience really, it just made me feel awful as a customer. They didn't seem to value me at all. And I asked at that moment for them to look up how much I'd spent there. And they didn't look at all the family members. They'd only looked at me, and almost were insulting when I said that, you know, I already had this looked up before, and I've spent all this money, and I would imagine you would want to treat me a little bit better in this situation. What actually occurred isn't important, and I don't want to give too many details that might tip off anyone as to who the business is. I'm not looking for any kind of vengeance or to have them be affected negatively, but I, after that day, have never dealt with them again. They have not received any revenue whatsoever, any profit from me, and at that point they probably had received about $60,000 to $65,000 worth of revenue from me, and they lost that entirely. Nobody's ever followed up with me to find out, hey, what happened? You used to deal with us all the time. And in this case, a manager was holding a line on a particular policy I completely disagreed with. And I want to say at this moment, as I'm sort of pondering these details in my mind, I believe that it was that person's right. That person clarified that she was in fact also an owner, and I didn't know that, and I congratulated her, and I asked, you know, how long had that been for? And I was trying to, I think we were both very polite to one another, but it was very awkward, and it was contentious. We were both feeling that. Maybe they were happy to see me go. I can't imagine that, because this was the only real negative experience I had with the business in all this time. But anyway, it is completely as a private corporation. They're right to decide whatever they want with their policies. I don't have any problem with that whatsoever. I support their right as a private business to be able to do what they want. And they lost my business. So this particular person was working on the front line and was customer facing, but there were a few people involved in that situation. Again, without getting into the details, there were 2 or 3 people, and I've felt a little bit ganged up on. And so there was that experience. By contrast, there's another business and similar industries, and I've dealt with that, the next one, about say 4 years. And I've spent maybe around $5,000 over the 4 years with that organization. And they have been absolutely delightful. Every person I've dealt with on the front lines, those customer facing employees, has been really, really good. And I could just tell they're trained. In fact, I spoke with the owner and I told the owner, it's evident to me that you do a really good job of both selecting your people and, more importantly, training your people, because it's got to start with you. It's not coincidental that all of your people are so good. This means you are training them well, you're communicating with them well. It means that you're selecting them well. However, very recently, I had a little bit of a unusual experience. I don't want to call it negative, although it did give me that pit of the stomach feeling later. I think it did for the person I interacted with. This was a frontline person who I've dealt with before, but not very frequently. We didn't know each other very well. And once again, policy was quoted to me, and it was a policy that I was aware of, but the way it was communicated to me really kind of caught me off guard, and I thought it was unusual. And then I started questioning. It just made me think what I often recommend to you, that in all situations, in all communications, and in all situations to do with your business, you should stop and think, give some critical thinking as to why you're doing something. Don't make any assumptions. And I didn't want to make any assumptions about the policy, so I asked more about it. What was the reason for it? And again, without giving any details that might give away the business or cause them any adverse reaction to my comments here, I can tell you that the person that I dealt with was delightful and very friendly and cordial to me, but the explanation I was giving didn't make sense, that I was given did not make sense. And I was like, Then what, it's just in my nature, I started to question. I didn't mean to cross-examine the individual, but the explanation I was giving was falling apart, and the person apologized twice with you've heard this apology, I'm sorry you feel that way, which is always, a bit of it's not that sincere an apology. It doesn't come across. So I would drop that from your word tracks. I'm sorry you feel that way. That is saying, that's not saying I'm sorry we did anything wrong. I'm sorry, I want to make this right or whatever. That's saying I'm sorry that you're unusual and other people don't have a problem with this. You feel this way. It's in your mind. Whatever. There's all sorts of implications to those word tracks but anyway, getting back to what happened, it occurred to me that there were only 2 possible explanations for the policy. And one of them was against what I philosophically believe in, and the other one I completely am fine with, which the other possible explanation was to increase sales for them. They had a policy that may lead to more sales depending on how it was explained to customers. And I've got no problem with that whatsoever. You should try to generate sales honestly and transparently in any way you can, as long as it's, again, legal, moral, ethical, then by all means, you should do that. And when the explanation of what was going on in this contentious situation, this policy that was quoted to me, was being shared with me, and the explanation didn't make sense, and I questioned a little more, and the logic wasn't there, and this person was kind of deflecting and just going to an apology. And I said, no, you don't owe me any apology. There's no reason for an apology. I just want to understand what is at the crux of this, because I may philosophically disagree with something that you're saying, and I want to understand it. I'm into business. I said to the person, I really want to understand things about how businesses operate. And she basically didn't make sense what she was saying. And so I said, is it about sales? Is this a way that maybe leads to more sales? And that was outright denied. And I asked another question, and the person could see that that might paint them into a corner if it led to more sales. So they said, no, 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 and gave me an explanation where that you don't have to buy anything and this kind of stuff. And so I was still puzzled in the end. And I said, okay, all right, well, hey, have a great day. And we went our separate ways. I want to reiterate that this person was very cordial, very pleasant. And I think they were just a little out of their element because they hadn't run into a customer like me before. I think that for sure the person was not being forthwith that it actually does lead to more sales. And all they had to do was say, yeah, you know what, it does often lead to more sales, and that's one of the reasons, and there's some other peripheral reasons and that kind of stuff. And that would have been fine. Ironically, this person essentially, if I'm right, lied to me, but earlier on, I skipped this part, they, part of their policy and how I was inquired about it, implied that I might be a liar. And so, again, I know this is difficult when I'm not giving the details, but ultimately I pointed that out. I said, you've almost suggested that I might be lying to you. Oh, I'm very sorry you feel that way, this kind of thing. But ironically, I think she was lying to me because I think that the crux of this policy was to generate more sales, or at least the quoting of the policy in this situation was intended to perhaps lead to sales. And so there was that situation. So I just went away a little bit puzzled, and I thought to myself, well, I've dealt with this organization for so long, I have no intention of this having any adverse reaction for how I continue to interact with them. I may speak with the owner about it, just to, again, wrap my head around what really transpired there. And that gave me pause, and again, to reflect on two larger businesses that I deal with. And both of them have had policies put in place. Right now, we're in an environment of business policies changing like crazy because of all sorts of restrictions and everything from central authorities and government and this kind of stuff. So now I'm looking at a couple of big businesses who have found ways to continue to extract money from me over and over, even though I don't like their policies. I'm not enamored with how they've handled particular situations, yet they are creating value, unparalleled value. They're finding ways to make sure that there's a way around what their policy is so that I can continue to give them my money and they can benefit from that. So the first two businesses were small, or maybe medium sized. I would say 50 to 100 employees, each of those businesses. And then the last two businesses that I've referred to are mega corporations that you're familiar with. And so that just made me think about this whole thing, and I thought about those people on the front lines. In all of these cases, the big companies and the small companies, mostly they have really good people on the front lines. And there's a paradox that I want to discuss, and that is the tendency for those frontline people, not in the case where I was dealing with the general manager, but she wouldn't have ordinarily been on the front lines, although she does do some periodic interactions with customers and things like that. But the paradox that I've observed is that often those people who are customer facing are some of the lowest paid people in the organization. And the paradox is they're some of the most important people in the organization because they are your face, they are your brand, they represent you, and they are a huge part of the value equation because they are part of the customer experience. And yet they may not earn that much. So this sort of inverse relationship between their high level of importance and their low level of pay is very interesting. I understand it because they may be not responsible directly for sales and driving revenues, but indirectly they certainly can be as part of the value equation from the customer experience. So give some thought to that. Think in your business, who is it that's primarily interacting with your customers? Who is handling your customers on a day-to-day basis? Who is making sure that your customers are happy? Who's handling incoming inquiries, questions, and what may they be saying? And these 4 experiences got me to think about the difference between how the large organizations and the smaller ones likely handle it. So I want to give you some advice to try to make sure that the very best scenario is happening in your business. I've heard it said that processes trump people as it relates to business. And what's meant by that is that the reliance on really good processes will give you more predictable outcomes than the reliance on your people being good and your people doing the right thing in a particular situation. So if you create processes with all of the various scenarios in mind and what people are to do, and sort of a flow chart of, if this happens, then do this, if this happens, do that, this is what occurs. And sometimes you can automate a lot of that. It's all about process. Then you train that to your people, and good processes will lead to more predictable outcomes than just relying on good people. Now, ideally, you would have both. You would have great talent acquisition, onboarding, training, operations, and you would have great people, because a really good person any day of the week is more valuable than a good process. I'll grant you that, but it's rare to have, like we talked about that paradox, really skilled high-level people that are necessarily going to be on your front line and be responsible for interacting with your customers. You may not be able to afford a person, or there'll be high transition of those people. You'll have high turnover because you can't afford to pay them, and if they're really that skilled, then they move on to something else. They may move on within your organization or move on to another job. So that paradox means that you can't rely heavily on just the people. So ideally you would have both. So think about your processes first and foremost. In your business, have you taken the time to think about what can possibly happen? Have you stopped whenever you have an upset customer, or you've had something break down in the logistics of your operation, and you've created a new strategy and you've documented a new process and then communicated that to your people? The next thing I want to advise you on, and this all starts with leadership, and that's why I'm addressing you. So as the business owner, as the manager, everything has to start with you, and people will take their cues from you. So you need to communicate your vision and then create that culture that you expect. If there's one of customer retention that you're really emphasizing on that, then you need to communicate that to your people. And then there's good training that starts with you. What sort of commitment do you have to training? Again, leadership can dictate the terms of or the freedom of communication, the flow of communication in the organization. What have you done to ensure that you have really good communication in your organization? Empowerment is another big one. If you have trustworthy people, you can empower them. And then lastly, your alignment of objectives. Think about in your organization. Once again, I asked you earlier to think about, well, who is interacting with your customers? Do they care if you lose a customer? And why do they care? Is it because they're a good person, or is it because they know that you care? Think about this, and have you aligned your objectives with your frontline people, with those people that are customer facing, interacting with your customers? If your customer base grows, if your sales grow, does that mean more remuneration? Does that mean a better pat on the back? In some way, does that person benefit? There's another paradox or an irony that occurs here, is often the workload for those frontline personnel increases with the success of your business. Well, if their workload increases, and to the degree that that is perceived by them to be a negative thing, that can be an anti-alignment of objectives. That can be fly in the face of what you're trying to achieve. So try to find ways to reward and recognize those people when you're more successful and your customers are more happy. The next thing I want to advise you to do is to measure. You need to measure your satisfaction. How well do you delight customers? How often do you delight customers? Measure your retention. What about your reorder rate? What about your referrals? Are you keeping track of this stuff? And when those measurements are going in the right direction, are you recognizing and rewarding those people who are customer facing, letting them know, hey, we're on the right track here. Do they see that? Is it clear on one of their report cards? Do they know this is something that's really important to you? Or are you just relying on, no, I hired a good person and they should know that customer satisfaction, it's intuitive, it's a no-brainer. It goes without saying, all these kinds of attitudes that sometimes business managers have, and they aren't doing those things on a day-to-day basis that reinforce this. So you might say, yeah, it does go without saying. I mean, we're not stupid. We all know we want our customers to be happy, but are you aligning the objectives of your frontline people? Are you empowering them to make your customers happy? And are you getting that feedback from them? When you do measure, if you're not happy with what's being reported, you're tracking these measurements, your reorder rate is going down, your customer retention isn't what it once was, you're not improving, then you need to take action. And what I would recommend you do is the Genchi Genbutsu, go and see. You should do like that general manager that I mentioned. You should be on the front lines occasionally observing. And remember, sometimes what you observe is not exactly how it happens day to day, because they will change their behavior with you being there. So the next piece of advice to mitigate against that is to mystery shop. Get somebody that you trust to shop your organization and give you feedback about what they experience, whether they call in or they submit a support ticket to customer service, or they come into your operation and they're not readily recognized as a friend of the boss kind of thing. And they can tell you, and maybe they can throw a few curveballs at your staff and see how they react. Are they doing what they're trained to do? Are they doing what you expect them to do? This is another way of inspecting what you expect. Also, be sure to solicit feedback from both your customers and your team members. The very people that we're talking about today, those customer-facing frontline personnel, get feedback from them, but also get feedback from your customers and find out, what should we be doing different? What questions come up? Have you had some awkward situations with customers? Think of anything. And then, of course, what you want to do is to create and implement improvement strategies for your business based on feedback you're getting both from customers and those people who know best, those people who work on the front lines, who are able to tell you, here's the reality of what occurs up here, and here's what I think we need. Here's the tools I think I could do better with. Maybe we should develop a word track on this thing. Could we have a particular piece of software? Could we have an automation? All these kinds of things that they can give you feedback that will really improve your improvement strategy. So those are the pieces of advice I'd give you, but what I wanted you to do is reflect. So start off by thinking about your experiences when you are the customer, and then think about, does that translate into information that you can use to make sure that your customers get a better experience? Do you really know what's going on your front lines? I've covered this topic before, but I had a few more thoughts on the matter I wanted to share with you. I hope you got something out of it, because that's where I want to leave it today. Leave a comment that we can all learn from, because we need to learn from one another. Perpetual refinement.